Welcome back to another Pearl Lemon Legal YouTube video. Now this video is for you if you are thinking of starting something online, perhaps just an online business, perhaps you have an existing business and you want to know how to be compliant online. This is going to cover starting a business and what to consider when starting a business just online. All right, now there are a few things to consider, and the first thing is what kind of business structure you should start. So it does in fact play a role. It'll play a role on the kind of taxes you pay. More on that in a moment. It'll play a role in your personal liability. It'll play a role in how you can attract funding, and it'll play a role in just sort of how administrative tasks are handled. So it also depends on the nature of your business. A lot of law firms will be set up as partnerships, and that's because it makes sense for the kind of service that they're offering and the way that profits are split. For many people starting an online business, you might default to saying, well, it makes sense for you to incorporate as a limited company. You limit your liability. If the company is involved in a legal dispute, the company is involved in the legal dispute, and while you might be involved as the representative, you might not be financially liable. Now, that can become a little more complicated, but that's the rule. So it's important to consider which business structure is correct for you. And as we mentioned, it does also affect your ability to attract funding. A partnership, for instance, isn't really set up to sell shares in the same way that a limited company would be. So you might want to consider that. Now, as we mentioned, the other thing is your tax obligations. So there are different tax rates for different businesses. If your business isn't making that much money, particularly in the UK, it might not be worth your while to incorporate. You may in fact pay more taxes as a company than you would as an individual. Now, once you cross a certain threshold, and we've spoken to a few accountants that we work with, and we do have an accountancy practice, Pearl Lemon Accountants, if you do want to check them out. And as a bit of a rule of thumb, it's rudimentary. Most of the time, if your business isn't making more than £20,000 per annum, you probably shouldn't incorporate, because your rebates as an individual will be more worthwhile. And so again, this will go hand in hand with when you're selecting the correct business structure. You want to bear in mind your tax obligations, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And so perhaps in the short term, it's best to stay a sole trader. Now, once you've decided how you will one day be paying taxes, how you might be attracting funding, how you're structuring everything, you now want to look more specifically at what it is you're actually doing and whether or not you need any licenses. Now, if you're working with animals, you're going to need some kind of permit. If you're driving a vehicle, naturally you would need a license. If you're practicing a professional occupation, you may need a license for that, if you're a lawyer or an accountant. If you are selling digital services, you might not need one. There are many businesses where the regulations are quite sparse in that regard, but it is important to look at that up front. I think one of the ones where we have come across people who potentially haven't gone through the process is they've started to breed animals and then realized they probably need to get their paperwork in order before they can actually start selling those animals. Now, on a slightly different sort of trend, you might want to look at protecting your intellectual property. So would you like to trademark your business? Would you like to, for instance, be the only one that can say that you are Nike and use the Nike logo? Do you have an idea? Are you developing an app that could be revolutionary that you haven't seen anywhere else before? It might be worth looking into obtaining a patent. If you're writing a story or a movie, you might want to look into copywriting that story, or potentially even just making sure you're not infringing on someone else's copyright. And so once you've gone through the previous 3 steps, you want to look at protecting your IP. And then you might want to look at how do you ensure that when you're marketing your business, you're not breaking any advertising laws. Now, this will be dependent on the region that you're in. It may even depend on the kind of marketing that you're doing, which brings us to our next point, which is privacy legislation, GDPR, data protection. If you're going to be sending out mass emails, look into ways that you can do that without breaching GDPR, without spamming people, without potentially even marketing with such zeal that you are harassing someone. Be careful with how you use people's personal information on a website. You may want to have a few disclaimers. Please do display that you have cookies if your website's using cookies for marketing purposes. Have people opt in for email lists. These are all the things that we all go through on a day-to-day basis when accessing websites, and we don't even think about them anymore. These are the sorts of things you might want to look into as you're setting up your online business to ensure that you're not breaking any laws in terms of data protection. And just on that note, there was a very interesting story a few years ago of a young man who in fact sued a company for misusing his personal information. He got added to a mailing list after accessing their website and took them to task for it. He eventually obtained a £150 settlement, which obviously was not the most lucrative, but people do look, and it's a small subset of the internet that does this, but they do look for opportunities to sue large corporations for breaching their personal rights and their rights to privacy, because it can be lucrative, although not generally, but in this case it was only £150. All right, boring facts aside, that was briefly how to start an online business and be legally compliant. We hope that that's given you a few things to think about when looking at starting a business of your own. And if you are in the process and you're not too sure about how to avoid breaching any laws, please do be in touch. We'd love to help. We've assisted a number of small businesses and startups just navigating those initial steps for their business so that they can focus on doing what they do best. Until next time, stay legal.